Hey guys, welcome to FPG. Today we're gonna continue our journey through the lives of the orcs and learn a lot more valuable things about them, like them being part fungus and so on. So without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? And here we go
to the
again.
apocalyptic warg, the continuous swelling of orc mobs starts to reach a critical mass.
Ooh.
Ships and transport vessels are smashed together, and the orc armies reach a point of no return.
Yeah, let's go.
This wave of violence now comes crashing down as the orc armies overflow with bloodlust, descending into battles that consume entire worlds. The Gargant idols further trigger the instinctive drives of the orc clans and tribes who would do anything to outdo each other's destructive capabilities. At some point, this wave of fury and raging violence reaches its boiling point, and the orcs begin to gather their great warg army. The ground shaking under the weight of tracked vehicles and striding walkers. The skies turned black from flyers, belching out blackened exhausts, and their ragged banners of brutality raising high atop these rusting, illogical contraptions of war.
We love it.
Wargs are very decentralized and have very little true coherency, even with a powerful war boss or warlord overseeing things. Various fragmented factions will exist in a warg, cults of speed for example, whose principle is to go fast. Essentially speed freaks who love the thunderous roar of an engine, and if they can shoot some guns at the same time, all the better. Probably driving over and crushing some of their own kind in the process. Storm Boys are elite shock troops who strap huge rockets on their back to make sure they're first into battle, charging with no thought much to the consequences.
Yeah, that makes
sense. This is actually frowned upon by many orcs as they prefer to charge in under their own feet to get physically into the battle. Still, seeing a Storm Boy's volatile rocket pack malfunction go spinning off into an exploding disaster, certainly killing the pilot in the process, is great entertainment for the comrades on the ground. And then of course you got the Mad Boys. These are orcs overwhelmed by the psychic energy of warg. And they also can occur when clans of orcs inhabit a planet and have to develop their own technology over generations of spawned orcs. Either way, Mad Boys don't coexist well with their kin. They're essentially best described as feral, which is saying something by orc standards. These feral, crazed orcs are also known as nutters, and they're grouped together into squads who will either be a secret tool to success when unleashed on the enemy, or a hindrance when they accidentally slaughter any fellow orcs they happen.
Oh, because we see it here, non-orc related question. This Space Marine has lost his arm and it's basically only machine parts. Are many of their body parts, changed into machine parts, or is it just part of the exoskeleton armor, basically? Or did he just lose an arm before this and it got replaced by a mechanical arm? Or do they all have mechanical arms like this? It would be interesting to know, because I just saw it and I was a little bit confused, because I thought, that are basically mostly normal mutated Superman, but they still have all their body parts and stuff like that.
Once combat begins, Mad Boys can still be some of the most savage fighters to an orc foe, or fellow orc alike, ripping them to pieces. Still, they're just as likely to sit in a whimpering huddle, unable to move, overwhelmed by psychic confusion. Man. No orc can tell exactly how they're going to behave, and making them an unpredictable and extremely dangerous force to bring onto the battlefield. Along with their crudely smashed together spaceships and space hulk infestations, orcs have even been reported to convert asteroids into massive space fortresses known as the uncreatively titled Orks. The orc species is one of the most adept at making the best of their surrounding materials, and this is the genius and danger of their design. The old ones created the orcs with only two things in mind: making them deadly and to make them near impossible.
So they made an asteroid hollow and built into it. Made it into a spaceship, whatever, landmass, mutation, base. That's fucked up, man. But that's crazy. Man, all that shit is crazy, but that is a little bit insane, just taking an asteroid and building your stuff on it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Exterminate. Orcs are a plague upon the galaxy, to be sure, but not because of their skill in battle or because they spread insidious ideologies, but simply because they're so difficult to truly eradicate. Humanity, for all of its technology and experience, often must resort to planetary exterminatus to be truly sure of destroying an orc
Heard about
infestation.
This one, man.
Orcs defeat their enemies by either overwhelming them or wearing them down to a point of collapse through continuous losses in personnel and materials, simply by attrition. Orcs operate from a sheer antithesis of order.
That guy just looked like, we don't need Space Marines, Mom. We have Space Marines at home. That was basically his orc armor there.
Warfare. Usually any force will seek out decisive victories, utilizing minimal resources and seeking to limit casualties. Orcs, on the other hand, seek no limitation in casualties or resource management. They have no control over this, but to burn as hard and as fast as possible. And even when defeated, they will return to grind down whatever crumbling defenses remain of their enemy.
Burn fast, burn bright. There it is. The Warlord. Ooh, it could be
Now, there are many individual stories and tales of orc warlords and bosses, as there are within the Imperium and its various leaders, captains, and general history. In orc culture and history, you can't speak of the orcs without mentioning the warlord, Ghazghkull Mag Orc Thraka.
That's a
He's
complicated
an orc warlord
name.
of the Goth clan and is an immense symbol of everything orc.
Oh my god.
Despite orcs being generally an anonymous mass of anarchy, he stands out as a powerful leader. He's commanded multiple campaigns and crushed most, if not all, in his sights, be they Imperial, Eldar, or Chaos, smashed the metal skulls of the Necron into brittle scrap. He has influence above that of any ordinary orc warlord and is often described as a prophet of their gods. He travels the galaxy subjugating, slaughtering, and burning the enemies of the orc.
That's interesting.
His vision is to wage a warg so immense as to summon the orc gods out of the immaterium and into the physical realm, and he extends their will.
There we go.
But his beginnings were nothing of note, just another orc bashing in other orcs' brains to climb up the ranks, and originating on a planet known as Urk, originally Orkles, founded by humans during the Dark Age of technology. Humanity prospered here, rich in mineral wealth, and with easy warp tides flowing for space travel, it was an excellent trade hub. Lights and noise attract attention. Resources make good mechs, and the orcs would become aware.
Time to plunder.
Attacking with a voracious assault, the orcs would raise the planet before riding back into the warp tides. As with nearly all orc assaults, the departure is not as clean as it appears to be. They'd leave behind fungal spores, and the orcs would return in time. Other species would periodically form outposts on the planet. Sometimes the orcs would rise up, other times not. Sometimes they'd be destroyed, sometimes not. It wouldn't be until the Great Crusade of mankind, though, that any humans would return here in numbers. The Dark Angel Space Marine Legion would lay claim to the world, and for 2,000 years humanity would build, mine, and establish a functioning order on the reinstated world of Urkles. That was until around the 32nd millennium, when a great orc warg swept through the system. Humans were overwhelmed again and evacuated, fleeing into the warp.
It's crazy how strong they are.
They want to be. Urkles would be cut off and not easily reached by outside influence again for about 8,000 years. The orc tribes, however, remained, battling one another and fighting over the human ruins that remained.
The art is always great.
A state of genuine attrition was reached, with various warbands fighting over ever-diminishing resources.
The Highlander
None of them
orcs.
able to unite under a single leader.
Very interesting.
Then came Ghazghkull. One thing the Imperium had learned about the orcs, though, was that their wargs could be quashed if detected early enough. The Imperium would begin to deploy observation posts so as to best detect and monitor orc numbers and activity. The Dark Angels monitored this, as well as they routinely monitored human populations for potential recruiting planets. After the warp tides had calmed, the Dark Angels were able to establish one such outpost on Urk, so as to monitor this well-occupied orc planet. The orcs, however, desperate for any loot and resources, managed to discover this observation post, and it was quickly overrun. At this time, Ghazghkull was just a Goth's trooper in a warband, and during the frenzy to claim the base, he would be shot in the head by a bolter shell, a devastating injury that would shatter his skull and pulp a section of his brain.
What?
Staggering back to his feet with immense toughness, he drew the respect of orcs around him, especially Goths. Despite being a physical wreck, staggering and stumbling, his blood and brain spilling out into his own hands, they eventually found their way to a doc, who would perform what I guess orcs deemed to be an operation. As is often the way with orcs, this was less a repair and more an improvement, an augmentation, and probably a bit of an experiment. Ghazghkull found that his skull and brain were now strengthened with bionics, squig sinew and adamantium plating.
Ooh.
These physical alterations were great to be sure, but nothing compared to the vision he would see awakening from this augmentation. he would see a vision from Gork and Mork themselves to lead Orks on the greatest, most destructive and carnage-reaping warg that there had ever been. It was his sole core belief that he had been in direct contact with his gods, and that he was the chosen leader and the executor of their commands. That, or his brain got pulped by a bolt gun round through the skull. Either way, his purpose was clear and his resolve strengthened. And as is often the way in Orc culture, the whys and wherefores are not really relevant. It's the actions that count, and Ghazghkull's actions would be notable. Orc warlords began to fall immediately under his crushing will. The Death Skull's warlord Dregmek, with Ghazghkull barely minutes out of his surgery, the Death Skull's warlord would attack, unleashing a bullet storm that left Ghazghkull untouched. By perhaps godly intervention, Dregmek could not believe his eyes as Ghazghkull would stride forward, beating him into a bloody pulp, headbutting and smashing him to pieces as his mobs looked on. Some getting
I mean, if you headbutt someone, with a basically metal skull now, that can't be good. That must hurt. But this is interesting how those, those stories around the orcs, those myths form basically from looking like sheer coincidences. That's pretty cool. And because they're such a race that might be very easy to believe stuff, and their beliefs have powers, so it's exhilarated basically. That's kind of a cool aspect of their nature, That's pretty interesting. I like that aspect. I like it a lot. Because if they all believe he is supernatural, he is the prophet, he is whatever, and their powers, their beliefs come true, then he will be just empowered more and more and more and become the ultimate orc. Maybe if they all think he is invincible, he will live forever and stuff like that. That could be pretty interesting. I like, the part is just their beliefs in him are easily triggered or triggered by something very coincidental, and then stuff like this happens and he becomes the greatest leader of all just because they believe him easily, and if they all believe in him, it actually becomes true. That's kind of funny.
Carried away in the violence and even cheering Ghazghkull on, roaring from his victory, Ghazghkull declared himself the prophet of Gork and Mork.
There it is.
And that this was his mere beginning.
This orc
the
Jesus.
Word of Ghazghkull's brutality and power spread fast, and orcs flocked to join a band with a sense of purpose and direction, to be something more than the pitiful squabbling and clamouring for scraps that they'd become. The tales of a new boss touched by the gods with a vision for war was very appealing.
Yeah,
his further battles with the evil suns and bad moons would be no less aggressive, but required more tactical sense, using burning fuels to shield his troops' approach or outwitting warlords through their sense of pride for their disposition. He was placed as an inevitable leader. His subjugation of other warlords continued until he stood poised to do something no other orc warlord had done in 8,000 years. Unite the tribes on the planet of Urk. His domination of the planet was unquestioned, but Ghazghkull had set his sights far beyond bringing together the orcs inhabiting his world.
That's pretty
His
badass.
words drove the orcs to their purpose, the warg beginning to form. Their energy attracting others, void ships began to arrive. For the first time in centuries, mechs worked together, building machines they never could have imagined previously. But now with the energy and the power of the warg, it all just worked. It was a miracle. The orc energies flowed as they riveted together giant battle fortresses and mechs. Everything that occurred was the will of Gork and Mork, and Ghazghkull would declare every passing day, every achievement, every new ship arriving proved their quest was divine. Some of the orcs, they were wondering how they were going to get so many of the orcs off the planet. They didn't have very many flyers and no large ships to transport
Just
and begin
imagine.
their warg.
Just
Ghazghkull
imagine.
quickly silenced them. A solution would present itself. It was the will of Gork and Mork. Days later, the ever unpredictable tides of the Immaterium would shift again, and that rarest of occurrences would happen. A gigantic ancient space hulk would emerge from the warp.
One of those ghost ships.
Ghazghkull ordered tractor cannons and harpoon rockets on the few spacecraft that they had to secure the hulk. They couldn't guess as to how long before the warp would swallow the ancient ship, even with them holding it in place, and they needed to work fast. The Orks rushed to assist in mech construction. They crafted as many transports and war machines as possible. Once they deemed enough was enough, they crammed as many Orks into every possible space and set off. This great exodus from their backwater planet filled the skies, not without many mid-air collisions and engine failures as well, to be sure. Crashing into the Space Hulk's outer hull, some managed to make their way inside, some straight on ploughed into the vessel, and those with more sense sought out landing positions.
Yeah,
the Orks soon discovered that they weren't alone on the Space Hulk, with wave after wave of demons spilling out of its corridors. Battling through the horrors, Ghazghkull and his band fought through to the centre of the Hulk, where they found, merged and jumbled by the warp, was the ship, the Dominion. This was the vessel the humans had attempted to flee from the planet on some several thousand years ago, and seemingly it had been swallowed by the warp, its human occupants devoured by the demons as they lay trapped in their vessel. The void rift that was spilling demons had to be closed, but Ghazghkull, after ordering his Orks to fire everything they had, was furious to discover it had no effect. His own weapon, even his own power claw, eventually with a massive headbutt and a flash of green light, that did the job, closing the demonic portal.
Just headbutted,
It seems
man.
likely his latent psychic energy was what effected this in closing, but for the Orks observing, it was only further imbued their belief that this warlord was a force like no other.
Of course.
Ghazghkull now named his conquered Space Hulk the Ork warship World Killer.
That's big. World Killer.
The ship would drift on for an undetermined period of time, in which the Orks would explore, loot, and generally rip off whatever they could find on board, cannibalizing the ship and using its materials to craft ever more powerful mechs and weapons. They appropriated everything they could lay their hands on and built everything they could lend their hands to.
That story
The best
is
scrap
wild.
would often lead to infighting and rivalry, all a positive thing for the Orks to keep their tensions and blood up. It would not be a quiet period though. Travelling through the warp in such an unsecure vessel is dangerous, and many times they'd be assaulted by further demonic incursions. And these assaults only further heightened the Orks' warg until the entire Space Hulk was seething with Ork energies.
You know, I love the Orks. I don't know why, but basically, even though they're not one of my, top favorite races, because I have some for aesthetics, then lore reasons, then this, that, and that. They're all different kind of top class things I would say I have in this universe. And the Orks, until now, are not really a part of it, but they're creeping up there real fast. But what I like the most about the whole Orks history and story overall is everything else so far, you saw build up. Story or history made sense in some way. But the Orks, it's basically like they're stumbling into everything. Nothing is really intentional. And their story, the lore, it just keeps building on itself out of this, comic relief, goofy kind of way. It's not really, the history is not really goofy itself, but I just keep stumbling into it. So that's a bit surreal. That's not like you would say real history. You see no build up. It has no linear path. It has no build up really. It just goes. It stumbled from this occasion, just a random incident into that, into this, and it goes just crazy and beyond everything. I think that is a really cool part, and it's so different. It gives everything a different twist. Also, this warlord emerging now, becoming the basically supreme leader of them all by just believing in them and believing in him just makes him stronger. And as long as there are enough Orks, basically he can't be stopped because they all believe in him and the power accelerates. It's just fun, The history, yeah, that's pretty much what I searched for in my head. It's fun. The history is fun, the race is fun, it's all just fun. And as I heard in another video, it's basically true, There can't be a salty Ork player, and as well, there can't be really a salty Ork because they're just having fun, man. That universe is made for them, and whatever they do in this universe, they don't give a shit. They're having fun, they're enjoying their life, they're doing their walks. It's just, for them, it's just, I don't know. A kid in a candy store, basically. They're all kids in big, big candy stores. And that is just a great way of doing something. Wow. It's all grim on the
Space Hulk
outside,
jolted
but
and huge tremors
fun
swept
everywhere
across the
else.
ship. The World Killer had shifted back into real space.
Ooh, there it goes.
Imperium records date the emergence of the Space Hulk in the year 941 M41. They were headed for the core planet of the star system,
Oh no.
an Imperial world aptly named Armageddon. An industrial hive planet where thousands of years of extensive industry had left it a barren wasteland with a totally collapsed ecosystem.
Hold up.
Humans only
Wait a minute.
survived in the concentrated hive cities that stood kilometers tall, and also in the Imperial military facilities stationed there.
I heard that before.
Food needed to be imported off-world, and no life existed outside of the hives.
That
It contained
Hell's
multiple
Reach?
vast manufactorums vital to munition supplies for the Astra Militarum. But with one of the most savage and relentless wargs ever seen headed straight for them, it seemed like nothing was going to be able to stop World Killer and its crew. The ship would head straight for the planet
Let's
without
go.
stopping. The plan? There wasn't a plan. They would crash straight into the planet.
As always,
Gazgu
there's no
was
plan,
literally
man.
on a collision course with his destiny.
A
Caught
what
off guard, nearby
plan?
Imperial fleets and the planet's defences did what they could to slow the assault, but this only chipped away at the massive Space Hulk that approached. Taking
Hell
minimal
yeah.
effective damage, it ploughed straight into the planet's polluted
the
atmosphere,
hell?
crashing with obvious devastation onto its surface. Even though many thousands of Orks would be turned to ashes on impact, this was but a tiny percentage of their total force. To the survivors, Gazgul seized this opportunity. "It is the will of Gorka Mork that we survive," he would proclaim.
True.
The Orks, now twice as pumped up, having survived their world-ending crash into the planet,
I love
would be a
this.
force none would wish to reckon with, and Gazgul quickly divided his massive army into 5 hordes, with leaders that he'd subdued and recruited to his cause back on
Zup,
Earth.
zup.
They'd now stepped forth, millions of Ork, but one voice. The human defenders weren't prepared for this. They had many forces, war gear and munitions, but the sheer scale of the violence and ferocity they were met
Won't have
with
enough
was
bullets for
nothing
that,
they
man.
dreamt of in their worst nightmares, which in the 41st millennium is certainly saying something. This was not an ordinary Orc warg. This was Gazgul Thraka's
It's
warg.
a super walk.
The Orcs showed expectedly no mercy at any instance, and they defeated the humans on the wastelands with their speeders and battle wagons, ruined enemy supply lines and cut down anything that moved.
Mad Max,
and they quickly
let's
turned
go.
their attention to structures that they had never seen before. These hive cities, taller than mountains, industry and engineering on an imperial scale. The mechs stood in awe. So much scrap, they would have murmured. At the first hive they encountered, despite the Imperium putting up a formidable defense at Hive Volcanus, heavily fortified, this would take all of Gazgul's cunning. He had his gargants, but he wanted to take this city with Orcs on the ground, scorching, burning and reaping through the trenches.
Let's go.
The Orcs would smash, crush and break this city. Using his visionary choices of units, Gazgul crushed the human defences quickly, and on breaking the gates, unleashing a wave of infantry. His will was executed perfectly, a tall order for an Orc warg.
Of course.
Desperate humans resorted to guerrilla warfare, but despite much heroism, the Orcs swept through like a plague,
Yeah, that won't do
slaughtering and
anything.
enslaving its occupants. Its manufactorums were quickly converted to Orc workshops. Human slaves turned to stripping their own city for every scrap of resource that could be used to fashion more Orc mechs.
Jeez.
Now, on the planet of Armageddon,
Oh, it's
one
him.
human stood out from the general perception of the Orcs as a weak and puny race: Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. He drew unusual respect from the Orcs, not least because he wore Goth colours of the black and red, but also sporting an augmented power claw and bionic eye.
Hell
This
yeah.
was a human the Orcs could get on board with. Even more so when they learned from enslaved humans that they often feared Yarrick as much as they feared their other enemies. Yarrick known for shooting disobeying soldiers out of hand. Orcs, upon seeing him in battle though, were often disappointed to see he wasn't quite as big as they'd imagined. He was only a
Aw.
human-sized figure. Oh well, he was an uncompromising warrior
Sad.
nonetheless. Yarrick was the man credited with withstanding the Orc assault on Hive Hades for a significant period of time. This assault brought the Armageddon War to a new level of brutality. The Orcs had already sacked 2 Hive cities, and Hades stood next in line. The Imperium, in desperation, would launch virus bombs, devices not used since the time of heresy, against the Orcs. And even
no.
though hundreds of thousands of Orcs would perish, it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Gazgul wanted Hades, and he would direct the assault himself. He tried everything he could think of, growing ever more frustrated all the time. But all his traditional assaults would fail time and time again. Eventually, he summoned his weird boys to use their Warg-consumed minds to blast a psychic storm at the Hive. Consumed by madness, the human defenders fell apart, but still the humans couldn't be defeated. The Orc flyers were ripped apart by anti-aircraft fire, tunnel fighters cut their Orcs trying to advance underground to pieces, and human suicide assault squads took down the immense Orc gargants. All this would be Commissar Yarek's doing. Ghazghkull by now had become fixated and obsessed with bringing down Hive Hades, his vision and judgment clouded by the frustration and needing to bring it down. While still battling this bitter assault, he would direct an Orc horde to assault another Hive city, Acheron, perhaps in the hope to divert resources away or gain a victory and rally his troops to greater energy. But then, the worst possible development for the Orcs. Orbital bombs rained from the sky as roaring Space Marine Thunderhawks would sweep down into the planet. The Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and Salamanders. The Emperor's chosen warriors were here to defend Armageddon. Ghazghkull was still so blinded by fury in his efforts to defeat Yarek and Hades, he was unable to think with clarity enough to counter the arriving Space Marines. He would throw everything he had to take down his obsession, breaking in the blast doors of Hades in a final rampage. The Space Marines would be too late to save Hive Hades, its citizens massacred. With Ghazghkull's numbers now though severely depleted and loosely scattered across the planet, he consolidated his last reinforcements to a new hive, Tartarus. The planet stood at a crossroads, even with the arrival of the Space Marines. They would deploy even as the Orcs began their assault with mechs, stompers, and even Gorkanauts.
Looks badass.
The battle though was not in the Orcs' favour, but then Ghazghkull himself arrived. The Orcs could taste things were turning for them, but then just as quickly as he arrived, he'd gone.
What?
Chatter spread quickly through the Orcs that the war boss had fallen. They began to waver to break, and the Imperium crushed the remaining Orcs, driving them from Armageddon.
They lost the figure they believed in.
But the Orcs thinking Ghazghkull had fallen in battle was not so. Ghazghkull was not slain, but he did disappear from the battlefield. Rumours spread that the hand of Gork had plucked him from the battlefield, and his detractors would say fled, usually to be met with a swift headbutt from a nearby Orc putting them in their place. However, it did happen. Ghazghkull had escaped. After Armageddon, Ghazghkull did not rest. As with most Orcs, defeat is not really a thing, it's just a stumble, a setback, a chance to have another go. This was the beginning for him in his larger journey, a plan of Gork and Mork.
Little flesh wound.
Yarek recommended the Imperium hunt down this brutal war boss and eliminate him once and for all, but the Imperium assumed him dead or defeated and didn't want to spend the resources or time to locate an Orc they were sure that was the last they'd see of. This was a grave error of judgment, as is often the case with most things in the Imperium.
Not good.
To the Imperium's mind, his Warg had failed, and therefore, even if he did survive, Orcs would not look upon him for leadership with his energy deflated. After losing a battle, while Orcs will happily try again, they'll often topple their leader, as is their natural order of things. But not so with Ghazghkull. While he may have had to defeat several challengers in brutal fashion after he regrouped with various Orc tribes to remind them just who he was, he would begin gaining new followers again. Curiously for an Orc, not just with his actions, but with his words. To him, the invasion of Armageddon had been a starting point, a testing of the enemy to find their strengths and their weaknesses, a large-scale intelligence gathering, Orc style, leaving millions dead and burning cities in its wake. And in this, they gained much useful information.
There he comes again.
Now Ghazghkull knew about Imperium strategies. He would regroup, rebuild, and restore his prophetic Warg. He would reveal to his fellow Orcs, in order to destroy your enemy, you must know him. To the Orcs, this is about as profound as it gets, and their spirits would reignite. The second coming of Ghazghkull Thraka was only a matter of...
Now this ending came quite out of nowhere for someone that doesn't really know the lore, you know? Did this second battle not happen this far, or why was it not really discussed here? I'm pretty curious about it, or wasn't it that important as the first one? Or is it just, a big event in history which takes its own video? I really don't know. Might have to do, I really think it has to do with Hell's Reach, because I started the series and what I got from the first episodes was kinda, Armageddon, Hades, stuff like that. I heard that. So was the first part maybe this, or was it, later the Returning War? I don't know, but that give a lot more about this one prophet than it gave around the rest of the orcs, but it was pretty cool. And as I said before, I really like how the orcs' history basically is not a linear path, but rather, stumbling not really into success, but, stumbling through the lore, and out of nowhere something that wild can occur because they are built on belief, and if they believe in something, it becomes real. It is just a great way of doing a story. It's also a fun way of doing a story, even though the Warhammer 40k universe is grim, dark, horrible. Those guys are living their best lives, and their history kind of reflects it. They're just having fun, man. They are the kids in the candy stores. I really like it. I really enjoy it, and I think it's really, really true that there can never be a salty orc player because, those guys having fun, the players are having fun. It is just a fun bunch, I feel. I'm also interested in other models of those, asteroid kind of built ships or stuff like that because they're looking kind of wild. I don't think there would be a model for it, but if there is, I would want to see one because it's just crazy. I really like the orcs. I really like what I learned so far, and I'm really interested to know, their contact points, maybe their videos of their contacts with other races and what happened, or the beginning, maybe even their creation, what happened after their creation, how, things turned out from there. I'm pretty interested, it's just the 40k universe, it's so vast, so gigantic, it's so much to learn, to understand even a fraction of it, and I'm really trying, but it's hard, man. It's hard. Most universes you look a few hours into and you know what's up. Here, if you look for days and you still have no idea what's really going on, man. It's just a crazy story. It's a crazy universe. But I think that is really a big part of the appeal of 40k. It's just so vast, so wild. Everything is going on there. There's a little bit for everyone, basically, in this universe out there. And I like that. So, we have a lot more coming up, a lot more to watch, but this is for the Orcs Wars Live. I hope you had fun and thank you for watching. That's all for now. I'm out. Bye.